Welcome to worship at First Unitarian Church of Rochester, New York. Please join me now in voice, body, and spirit as we sing our opening hymn, We Gather Together.
Welcome to online worship at First Unitarian Church of Rochester. I am so delighted to be with all of you. Here, our mission is through spiritual connection in community. We listen deeply to others and ourselves. We open to wonder and transformation, and we serve together with love and humility. Today, we celebrate the 250th anniversary of American Universalism, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. But leading worship today with me is a special guest. Of course, I'm here, I'm Reverend Sherry, and I don't take any of the following people for granted, but Reverend Margalee and our worship associate, Megan Garvey, and Tommy and Arson, and Richard Wilder are joining to lead worship. And of course, there's all of you. It wouldn't be Sunday without you. But we do have a special guest, Reverend Christine Dance, who's a UU minister in Phoenix and a dear friend of mine, is joining me. And congregants of hers, the Lipships family, is helping teach us the story of how universalism literally crash landed on our shores. It's such a joy to welcome a little bit of Phoenix this morning. It's very early for them, and they've showed up for us. Thank you for being here. Behind the scenes, we've got greeters and ushers and tech volunteers and a chat chaplain. It takes many hands to make Sunday morning happen. And of course, there's a lot that happens in between Sundays. Some of you may have already received, and if you haven't, hopefully by tomorrow, you'll have in your hands a letter from us with leaves. We invite you to participate in our memory tree service next week. As is our tradition, we honor those who have died. We celebrate their memory among us, and we carve out space for grief each year. This year, it feels especially important. And on those leaves, written are the names of people who've died in ICE and Border Patrol custody, those who have died of COVID, and those who have died of gun violence here in Rochester. Not written on the letter, but certainly written on those leaves are also the names of members and friends of this congregation. So I invite you to bring those leaves and add the names of people who you love that you'd like to honor on our memory tree. Bring those to the church Sunday through Wednesday of this week, and we'll honor and celebrate these names, these lives, these memories together next Sunday. Before that, a little bit lighter, is our ghoulish garden walk. With all going on and the many decisions to make regarding COVID safety, we invite families and our members and friends to come to the church grounds to help celebrate Halloween and to lift up our mission for just that evening of listening, opening, and severing. Just one letter difference. really matters on that evening. After this service, we'll join in smaller breakout rooms for conversation and connection. And now I invite you to take a breath with me. Let's settle into this sacred time and place. Lighting our chalice this morning is our young adult member, Sarah Teague. Sarah will be voting in a national election for the first time this year. So please join Sarah in our chalice lighting. Please join Sarah in exercising your right to vote.
May the flame we now kindle inspire us to use our power to heal with love, to help with compassion, to bless with joy, and to seek liberation in the fullness of community.
A few weeks ago, I was having a particularly challenging conversation with a colleague of mine over Zoom. We were talking about something that I felt very passionate about, and the conversation just wasn't going the way I had hoped. As I could feel my patience start to grow thin, I also felt a ton of just really witty, but definitely ineffective retorts popping up in my brain left and right. Just as I was on the verge of unleashing one of these ineffective but very clever remarks to this person, I noticed my attention got captured by this strange brown spot, which appeared at the bottom of his screen. He didn't seem to notice, but this brown spot started to grow in size, and it started to give off golden specks. And it was making a very strange noise that I couldn't quite place. I tried to redirect my attention back to my point of frustration, but it didn't take long before we broke out into a much-needed moment of shared laughter, as this brown spot quickly turned into the face of a very joyful and very curious golden doodle puppy. And I think this is why we come to church. Here at First Unitarian, we don't shy away from hard conversations. We really like to lean into our discomfort, or at least we try to. But we also make a point to look for those golden specks of levity and love that remind us of our shared humanity when we need it the most.
Please join me now in singing our next hymn, What Wondrous Love Is This?
What wondrous love is this, O my soul, O my soul? What wondrous love is this, O my soul? What wondrous love is this that brings my heart such bliss and takes away the pain of my soul, and takes away the pain of my soul. When I was sinking down, when I was sinking down, when I was sinking down beneath my sorrow's ground, friends to me gathered round. Oh my soul, friends to me gathered round. Oh my soul, to love and to all friends I will sing, to love and to all friends I will sing, to
me again. I'm here only to introduce the beginning of the story of John Murray and Thomas Potter. And to correct myself, it's the Lifshitz family. Thank you so much to Phoenix for the gift of this wonderful and charming beginning of our beginning story.
You never know what the wind will blow in or which way the wind blows. The wind can change directions and maybe change your life. It happened to John Murray. As a young man, John Murray had excellent fortune blow his way. He had a fine education, a steady job, a loving wife, and a young son. Life was good. Then, suddenly, everything changed. John Murray's wife and their son became sick and died. John lost his job, lost all his money, and he was put in jail because he could not pay his bills. John was a very religious man, a Universalist, who had even preached about a loving God.
I'm not sure what to believe. I feel like my life is over.
You should go somewhere and start over.
I'm going to book passage on a ship that is New York bound.
That ship was named the Hand in Hand. The wind blew. The ship toward their destination of New York. But then a fog rolled in. A thick fog that you could not even see through. The Hand in Hand ran aground in Good Luck, New Jersey, instead of New York. John and a few others volunteered to leave the ship, go on land, and get directions and supplies.
I'll take my Bible and purse and find some food.
As he was walking ashore, John saw a farmhouse with a small chapel beside it. It belonged to Thomas Potter.
Hello, my name is Thomas Potter.
I am John Murray from the ship Hand in Hand. Can I purchase some fish for my crew?
I will give you fish for your crew, and all that I ask is that you come back and have dinner with my wife and I tonight.
That is very generous.
It was very generous, but it wasn't entirely true. At dinner later that evening, Thomas Potter and John Murray got to talking, as you do, and Thomas Potter said, "Well, I believe that God loves everyone," as you do at dinner. And John Murray said, "Yes, I believe that too." And Thomas knew. Thomas knew that John was the one he had been waiting for. "I have built this chapel waiting for someone to spread the universal message of love. And you are that preacher," said Thomas. But John Murray was really clear. "I don't want to preach. I don't want to preach. I've left that behind me. I just came with my purse and my Bible to find some fish for my friends, and the wind will blow me away and I will go." And Thomas Potter was not an unfair man. And so he said, "Okay, if the wind blows you away, perhaps you were not the one. But if the boat has not sailed by Sunday, will you preach if you're still here?" And John Murray, not believing that the wind would not take him away, said, "Fine, I will preach." The Hand in Hand did not leave harbor that day, or the next, or the next. And indeed, the next Sunday rolled around, and John Murray was still there. And so he preached. And he preached that love universal welcomed creation to live full-heartedly. Thomas Potter built a chapel waiting for the preacher, waiting for the congregation who would believe in universal love and live to make that true. And it was good. The winds eventually changed and John Murray was able to leave harbor. But having been reconnected to his vocation, he went on to help found Universalism here on the American continent, not yet the US. So we owe a special thanks to John Murray for the Universalist branch of our heritage, but without Thomas Potter, without looking for a way to care for his friends, perhaps none of this would have happened. Now, these days, we can probably relate to this idea of having a building and waiting for the preacher to go into it, waiting for the congregation to go into it. We also probably know something about what it means to do something together with others that you couldn't do alone. And so today I invite your generosity. Our offering here at First Unitarian each week is split with a local community organization, an organization living out the work of love and justice. Today we split our offering with Habitat for Humanity. May we build buildings so that love universal might be more fully lived. I invite you now to give generously to this week's collection. There are a variety of ways you can give online. Our offering will now be humbly given and gratefully received.
A 1, 2, 3, 4. John Murray sailed on the hand in hand, and his ship got stuck on a bar of sand. So he put on his boots, he reached dry land to preach the gospel of love. Love, love. He put on his boots and he reached dry land to preach the gospel of love. Now Thomas Potter had a church built there, but still that church was weak and bare. No preacher had come, despite his prayer, to preach the gospel of love. Love, love. No preacher had come, despite his prayer, to preach the gospel of love. Thomas Potter offered hospitality, so John Murray would go back to sea. He said, man, won't you come and preach for me? Yeah, preach the gospel of love. Love, love. Won't you come and preach for me? Yeah, preach the gospel of love. John said the winds of change blow hard and strong, and I don't think I'm gonna be here that long, but if I'm here on Sunday, I'll come out strong and preach the gospel of love. Love, love. If I'm here on Sunday, I'll come out strong and preach the gospel of love. So the hand in hand they close by the shore. John Murray would run away no more. Thomas Potter's chapel flung wide the doors as they preached the gospel of love. Love, love. Thomas Potter's chapel flung wide the doors as they preached the gospel of love.
Whew. I invite you now to join me in a moment of meditative prayer. This will be followed by a moment of silence. Let's take 3 collective breaths together to settle ourselves. Whew. Whew. And 3. Like John Murray, we certainly know something about uncertainty. We have no idea what the next couple of weeks will hold for us, or the months and years ahead. But we have survived up to now. And some of us have even thrived. And that says something. It, at the very least, speaks to a resilient nature. May we continue to draw on that resilience. These past few months, these past few years, and for some a whole lifetime, they have been challenging and downright crushing. May the light of our spirits not be reduced by them. May we always strive to do our best. Today, we continue to see our siblings from all over this city, this country, and the world suffer from one affliction or another. May they never be too far from our hearts. May we send them healing energy. And as we vote over the next week or so, as we take part in the democratic process, may we be in touch with our deepest selves. And may we get what we need to take good care of ourselves, our loved ones, and our neighbors. May we remain resilient, strong, and uplifted. And may we know that we are loved and worthy of love, as universalism preaches. May we rest and love, and may we engage others lovingly and compassionately. May it be so.
how good it is to be with all of you. And yet, today I get John Murray. I'm feeling a lot like him. I don't want to preach, so I'm going to call in a friend. Reverend Christine, are you here?
Hi, Sherry. How are you?
I am doing so well. I'm with you and my gorgeous, loving congregation, and I'm so thrilled to introduce you to the First Unitarian Church of Rochester.
Hi, everyone in Rochester. It's so good to see you.
So, Reverend Christine, thank you for joining us to talk about universalism today, to talk about both this historical foundation that we have, but also what it means for us now. How do we live universalism? How does universalism live in us?
And we've got so much to learn from that, Sherry. We really do.
Yeah. So oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, I am feeling that you're kind of resonating with John Murray and not wanting to preach. And I've actually been thinking a lot about Thomas Potter, because Thomas Potter in that story was the one who had hope. He built, a chapel hoping that a minister would come and preach universal love in it. I mean, I don't know about you and your folks in Rochester, but I'm struggling to find that hope and that faith with so much going on, with the worries about the election and the world. The idea that somebody will just show up and will, preach seems so far away from me right now.
Well, the good news, Christine, is that we don't have to do it alone. If you're resonating with Thomas Potter, let's be really clear that John Murray's not the only character in that story, and we're not the only characters at church right now.
That is so true. That is so true. And I wanted to let you know, Sherry, and all of you in Rochester, that I've been thinking about you so much. I've been thinking about the protests against the absolutely unnecessary death of Daniel Prude, and watching you and admiring what you're doing, and just sending you strength and solidarity from Phoenix.
Thank you. That means a lot. You're often on my mind, and the Arizona desert is often on my mind. It is both a place that feels like a spiritual home for me, but also is a place that I've been thinking about a lot as the ongoing construction of the border wall and the militarization of our southern border continues to fall in and out of the headlines. It's happening all the time, but we often forget it. And of course, this week, it's very much on my mind with news of 500 children separated from their parents. None of this is news to you, I know, but I think—
No, and yet it's still so heartbreaking. I mean, there is a detention center that is right down the highway from us here in Phoenix, and we know it's always there, but I think we don't always keep it front of mind how much suffering is going on there, and just what that means with all of the border issues. So I appreciate you thinking about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that idea of what's front of mind is also a part of what I've been thinking about. I remember, so the last time I was in Arizona was to participate in Faith Floods the Desert, which was when it was an interreligious action, but many UU ministers gathered to engage in public witness to help provide support for organizers and activists who were helping keep border crossers alive by putting out water and food in the desert. And very specifically, I mean, there's so much about that experience that lives with me and within me. But lately, I've been thinking about this very strange, small moment that happened in that gathering, this gathering of like unabashed do-gooders, right? And thinking about, it's probably no surprise that I spend a fair amount of time thinking about all the ways in which I'm incredibly lucky, incredibly blessed, and incredibly privileged, quite frankly. And that most facets of racism in the US, in America, don't fall on me. But because I'm multiracial and Asian, I'm very familiar with the script of being othered as an outsider or a foreigner, with the idea that I couldn't possibly be from this country. And the idea of where are you from, where are you really from, being this conversation that I have a lot, right? And so I don't think an awful lot about that, but the reason I've been thinking about that gathering in the desert was because it was one of the few times in my life that someone around me, a white person, a friend, disrupted that conversation. It happens very infrequently. And in this case, after we had been in the desert, after the person who started to ask me, well, where are you from? And a series of other questions that, I've heard 1,000, if not a dozen times, in that conversation that I was so ready to be alone in, someone next to me who I didn't yet know jumped in, clearly because she had witnessed conversations like this before, to redirect, to ask the speaker where they were from and where their parents were from. And it was a really simple action, not something terribly complicated, but has only ever happened 2 other times in my life. And so I've been thinking about that person and how this idea of wanting to interrupt conversations like that, I think is something that a lot of us hold in common, but being able to live out of our values, to take that abstract idea and then make it actionable, is relatively uncommon, that we have to be prepared for it.
Yeah, we need to be prepared and we need to be courageous for that. That makes me so sad that that's only happened like 3 times for you. And also so glad that you've got that experience that it did happen. So I'm trying to think, like, going back to our story about John Murray and Thomas Potter and Universalism. So, I think a lot of people who are Unitarian Universalists, we explain Universalism saying it's universal salvation, that no one's going to hell. And I think that that's only just a piece, and actually the easy piece of it. I think it's more complicated than that. Don't you, Sherry?
I absolutely do. I mean, I said as much to our city council maybe a month back regarding our protests. And of course, UUA president, who your congregation knows well, Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, mentioned it recently in talking about our democratic rights, that our Universalist forebears, their radical heresy was not so much universal salvation, though of course they did believe no one was going to hell because God wouldn't do that. God loved people too much. But the Universalists at the start of John Murray's time here believed that hell existed. It just existed in the here and now, that we create it for each other.
Right. Yeah, it's that hell we create for each other, that what is happening in our own world. It is so much more challenging than just saying, well, there's no hell. It is saying we have created the hell here. We are living it with each other. And then it's important to say that how do we bring heaven then on earth? How do we love enough to create heaven here on earth, which of course is much harder to do, right? Much harder to do.
It's much harder to do, and it's a much more radical idea, not just to reject an idea, but to lift up and promote something actively. This idea of combating hell here on earth and creating little bits of paradise it's our Universalist legacy, but in lots of ways, it takes our Unitarian ideals to their logical extension. So if our Unitarian forebears said, well, character is more important than creed, who you are and how you are is more important than what you say you believe. Well, the Universalists lived that out. They took that up, that, Aristotle has that quote about how you are what you repeatedly do. And Universalists lived that out, that creating of bits of paradise through settlement houses, through activism, through fellowship in their own communities.
Yeah, it takes so much practice. It really does. And I think So last week in our congregation, we preached about the idea that, well, let's just say a number of people in our congregation were struggling with how to respond to the coronavirus infecting our president. How do they feel? Is it appropriate to pray and wish wellness? And feeling like they were bad Unitarian Universalists, particularly Universalists, if they weren't doing that. And I think it is important to struggle with that love, but it is not just about how do we love that one person who has COVID-19. It's about how do we grieve for the million people who we've lost from COVID-19? How do we grieve for the 70,000 people who got it this weekend? And it's not about the one, it's that collective universal love and trying to address that hell on earth and acknowledging the entirety of it.
Yeah, and that we take it in bite-sized pieces, right?
Yes.
That acting out of love. I do think our universalist heritage calls us to put the president as a subject of love, and also to put those million souls first. Once you get done praying and living fully for those million, I think we can get in line for that. But we've got an awful lot of work ahead, and we can only do it in bits and pieces.
Right. So how do we do that, Sherry? So, we're in this time, we're talking about some big stuff. Like, this is not easy. It is just not that simple.
Right. Yeah. And since you bring up politics, I mean, I think specifically, of course, as our young adults reminded us right at the beginning of our service,
so
and Reverend
great.
Margoley did, we've got an election coming up. Some of our folks have already voted. Lots of them will be voting in the next couple of weeks. And we're at this critical historical moment where we can expect on the spectrum of possibilities that we may be called into nonviolent resistance of the crumbling of our democratic institutions. We may be called to bear witness or bring protection in the case of post-election violence. There's this whole spectrum of possibilities. We are washing up on the shores of good luck, right?
We are, and not knowing when the fog is going to lift and what's going to happen, and if we will ever, achieve our destination, if you will, in a very metaphorical sense. It does remind me of, the story, and there is a universalist proclamation in our hymn that it kind of sums it up. It says, "Give them not hell, but hope and courage." And I think that's so profound. Not hell, but hope and courage. So how do we do that? All of these things you're saying, they could happen. There's a million scenarios of what could happen. And how do we prepare for that? And how do we ready our hearts for that? How do we ready our sense of courage for that? And the only thing we know is that it's going to be a very challenging and uncertain next few weeks.
Right. Well, so I think we take a page out of John Murray and Thomas Potter's story, which, by the way, in that story, Thomas Potter's wife's also a character. We never talk about her, but as they're sitting down at dinner and all those people who caught all that fish, there are a lot of people in that story, right? And so it's not just up to the two of us plus Reverend Margoley to give not hell, but hope and courage, that it's in lots of ways, everyone who's joining us here has to discern what the next step, the next courageous action, the next way of bringing hope is.
And I love that, because it's not always the characters. So it's not necessarily the president or the people in the election. It is all of the players. It is all the players at the table, even if they didn't make it into all the history books as prominent players. Good point, Sherry. Thank you.
Yeah. So as we think about the election, right, of course, here at First Unitarian, and Reverend Margoley's coordinating all of this because she is a godsend, like John Murray, washed up upon these barren, rocky shores. But there are lots of ways in which we're helping folks, I hope, offering space, both online and in person, but socially distant, to tap out of anxiety, to tap out of the doom scrolling and the news machine and connect with their spiritual grounding, we're doing that. There's hope there in being together when we can feel alone, but in really practical ways also. I think about what I started with in that story of how ultimately I'm not likely to be the most subjected to racially targeted violence.
Me too.
And so I think about the people who live on my block and the relationships that I have with my neighbors and what it will mean that I'm prepared to if they are threatened, or even if they are simply scared or alone, that I can go sit with them on their stoop, that we can maintain distance and be COVID safe, and I can wrap my blanket around me and one for them also, but sit with them on their stoop so they know they're not alone.
I love that idea, Sherry. And I love the idea of, what is in our sphere of influence. And I think back to your story in Arizona, and it challenges me to say, how can I be an interrupter? How can I witness what is going on and stand up as a voice of love to interrupt the behavior that we know is not grounded in love? Maybe good intentions, but is not our best universalist selves. And I really resonate with the idea of, tapping out of the news. I've been telling my folks here to turn off the TV. Like it will still keep spinning if you're not watching it. And we need to do really deep spiritual practice right now to reconnect with that universalist love. We need to stay grounded in who we are. And so that we can have that love in our hearts and our spirit, and so that we can send it out to help or to send energy to or to send resources to those who would be protesting, those who are most in danger, those whose rights are most at risk. And I think that that's really important that we take care of that. And then we need to save some of that for ourselves. We need to save some of that love for ourselves and for our children and for our parents, and check in on others who we know are struggling so much. It is so important to stay connected in all of that. So we have to have something left over.
I love that you started with to connect with that grounding, because that's the universalist message. I know that it can be easy to get caught up in, I would be a good person if I did this, if I'm on the stoop with my neighbor, or if I'm protesting, or if I do, and all of those things are worthy and important, but the universalist message begins with God's love for all people, right? That everyone starts by being worthy and important. And that with that firmly established and quite frankly non-negotiable, that there's literally nothing we can do to be unworthy of love. There's literally nothing we can do to be cast out of the circle of creation. We're invited to live out that love as full-heartedly as we possibly can.
How amazing. Can you imagine 250 years ago how radical that idea was? Just how radical to say that in that time, and the magic of, Thomas Potter building the chapel and John Murray preaching that universal love inside of it.
Radical then and radical now.
It is still very radical. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I need you to know that I am thinking of all of you there in Rochester, and in the next coming weeks, you have my prayers and energy for you personally and every single one in your congregation. It's so good to know that we are in this together across the country in very different scenarios. I know that you all are heading inside in your dealing with COVID, as we are just getting to come outside. We've been inside all summer while it's been too hot, and just understanding, how the interconnected ways that we are in this together.
Absolutely. With love and blessings to you and the people of Phoenix. May cool breezes bless you. May you have love and courage. May you be a beacon of hope, shining across the country, joining with us.
Many,
you for
many
joining us.
blessings to you, Sherry. Much love to you.
Right back at you. Amen.
Amen.
Let's sing. Can we sing, Tommy? I want to do that again. Let's do it loudly this time.
Please join me in singing our closing hymn, Love Knocks and Waits.
Love knocks and waits for us to hear, to open and invite. Love longs to quiet every fear and seeks to set things right. Love offers life in spite of foes who threaten and condemn, embracing enemies. Love goes the second mile with them. Love comes to heal the broken heart, ease the troubled mind. Without a word, love bids us start to ask and seek and find. Love knocks and enters at the sound of welcome from within. Love sings and dances all around and feels new life
Last week, I forgot to extinguish our chalice, so I got some help this week. Carol Ann Cleary, who is the mother of Sarah Teague, our new young adult member who helped light our chalice. Carol Ann's going to help us close it out today. Please join us in our unison words.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
There is nothing you can do to be cast out of this circle of creation. Puppies and love are waiting for you. Let us go out into the world to do the work of love. Go knowing that you are loved and you are love.